Okay. Let's try to not fall asleep. It's not a great room for lighting, so we're either in the dark or the screen can't be seen properly. So, thank you so much for coming along this evening. I think there may be some other people joining us over the course of the next while, but let's just make a start anyway, I think. I'm Richard Lanng, so I'm a professor from within architecture and built environment in this department. I think I know quite a few people in the audience, but certainly not everybody. So thank you so much for coming along. Our talk this evening is going to be from Dr. Ditte Lanng from Denmark, from Aarhus in Denmark. I first knew Ditte when she was a professor in Aalborg University in the north of Denmark, and I'm sure that Ditte will tell you what she's doing now, which is now slightly different. Before I pass on to Ditte, I was wanting to just say a few words about how we first met and why we've been doing this kind of research together over the course of the last few years. Before I do that, though, this is also part of a project which Jennifer and Mingyu and I are undertaking, which is a project called Brown to Green Transition. So I popped a little QR code on the bottom there. If you're interested in that project, it's certainly you can find out more on the website, but it's a project that's largely about, as the title suggests, a transition from former industrial land and areas to a kind of positive form of urbanism. And it's mainly in North and South Shields to the east of Newcastle. So if you would like to know more about that, if you click on the QR code, you can find out more. We do have a couple of events coming up as well within that. So we will have another public lecture at some point, but we're also going to be taking people on guided walks around South and North Shields where we can look at particular sites. So if you're interested in that, please just get in touch with any one of the three of us and we can add you to the list. That'd be nice. So I'll let Ditte explain what she's going to be talking about in a moment.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction, Richard, and surely I also enjoy being here, and I've enjoyed working with you over the years. I'm from Denmark, as Richard said, and I have a background in urban design and a PhD in urban design and mobilities. And I worked with Aalborg University, as Richard said, for many years as an associate professor and as head of research in urban design. Taught a lot of wonderful students. Today I got the chance to chip in Jennifer's supervision with some of your architecture students here, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I didn't know I missed it so much. But the thing is that since this summer, for approximately 3 months now, I've worked with the consultancy, the Danish consultancy NIRAS, as a specialist in sustainable mobility. I simply wanted to, experience something else and challenge myself in another way after many years in academia. So this is what I'm trying out. And I thought that it's really interesting to work in practice in these years with sustainable mobility because so much is happening. And in Denmark, at least, and I think it's the same here, it's such a politicized and contested field. How do we manage to make the green transition in mobilities happen? How do we meet the climate goals? What are the obstacles? How do we do it in a way that's respectful towards the everyday lives of the people that would actually have to use the places that we design? But apart from that, my field of work has been a lot about the design of the spatial fabric of urban and suburban and rural territories. And especially I've been working with the spaces of our everyday life mobilities. So the spaces that all of us move through on a daily basis. I work primarily, but not only, in a Danish context, and most of what you'll see today is from Denmark. That might be interesting in itself, and I'm eager, of course, to hear if you have far different experiences, or if you see any similarities or whatever your reflections are on kind of the Danish context that I'm going to present. The photos that you see here are from various designed and less designed spaces in Denmark, as you might see there. Okay. So there's something, just have to change it here as well. Yeah. So this is a slide. I just want to briefly introduce how I've been working as an academic in research, and also a bit about what I do today before I go into actually presenting the bits and pieces of the projects that Richard invited me to present. So in my research, I've worked both theoretically and practically to combine mobility studies, which is a discipline, a field in itself, and urban design in an interdisciplinary approach in the effort to understand better how design, mobilities, and what we might call societal matters of concern, democracy, green transition, welfare, how those issues intersect and influence each other. In particular, I've been interested in questions of the spatial and social agency of mobilities design. I've been interested in studying infrastructures beyond their technical capacity to seek to understand infrastructures as space and as form. That's the architect in me speaking there. And also understand how infrastructural spaces afford our lives on the move, and also how they work in deep systemic ways that might really interact with our societies in different ways. And then I've been working a lot with designing for sustainable mobility transition, for example, by developing spatial strategies and spatial scenarios with partners from practice, and also with my students at the urban design program at Aalborg University, as kind of a part of a research by design methodology that I've tried to develop and apply. And these are some images from various activities that I thought might give a picture of what I've been doing. And I have one more slide because as part of that research, interested in inquiring into how ordinary infrastructural spaces afford, invite, or impede various practices and experiences. For example, how it feels to travel through a tunnel, how we inhabit those ubiquitous spaces, how we make sense of them in our daily life, how they are entangled in what I've called sensory ecologies, their tactility, the sound of these spaces, how we see them when we travel through them, and even how we smell them. And I've used that to discuss how we could potentially reimagine their performance in the light of the changing aspirations towards the good city that we've seen over the course of the years, and is of course continuously a debated topic, what the good city could be like and what the good public spaces could be like. And now I'm trying to kind of take that academic background into practice in a meaningful way. I work with the consultancy NIRAS, as I said. It's a huge Danish consultancy company with lots of different competences in-house. I think we are more than 2,500 people in Denmark working there. And I'm a senior specialist in sustainable mobility. I work with spatial design and strategic development with a place-based and user-oriented approach. And what we are doing there is that we are in a process of building a small interdisciplinary team that can help cities in particular to develop and manifest strategies and plans and spatial designs that can drive the green transition in their specific contexts. This is for the cities in Denmark. It's particularly driven by the urgency of the climate crisis, We have a climate law in Denmark that cities kind of need to live up to within a very few years. They won't, and I think everybody knows, but it's still kind of a guideline for many of the cities. But it's also, of course, economic pressures of all kinds that kind of drive this agenda. For example, right now, the pressure on the provision of public transport in Denmark is a huge thing that we need to take care of. So what we do is that we work with all sorts of themes, such as walkability, mobility hubs in the public transport system, the 15-minute city that some of you have also mentioned today, but also mobility practices, behavioral change, stuff like that, and also various forms of data collection and data analysis. Yeah. Which is not my field. I'm a qualitative person by a researcher, so that's what I bring in. But some of my colleagues, fortunately, have competences like that. So the point that I want to make today, and also building on what Richard said earlier, is to open a conversation about how we study, understand, and design mobilities in the midst of transition processes. So there's sort of technological transitions going on. There's also the urgency of a green transition going on. There might be other transitions going on in parallel that we need to take care of. And in general, the approach that we've sought to develop during my years in research is to draw out a conceptual and analytical potential from the fields of mobility studies, STS, that's science and technology studies, and urban studies, and combine that with urban design and architecture to help us inquire into the social and spatial agency of infrastructure design. And through this, what I've tried to do is to find and develop, along with colleagues, robust approaches and also deep reflection on the social and spatial effects of infrastructure, how it is deeply intertwined and implicated with the processes of urbanization, mechanisms of in- and exclusion and spatial fragmentation, for example, but also how it includes socio-material aspects, the material and spatial organization and localization of mobilities, the systemic complexities, and the lived practices of mobilities. So Richard invited me to talk about the Art Forum project that he just briefly introduced with the images from our first meeting in Bremen in Germany. And Art Forum, art stands for automated road transport. And the point with the project was to develop guidelines and tools for decision makers and planners to handle the advent of automated or driverless vehicles, such as self-driving cars. It was a European Interreg project that was running from 2019 till 22, and it had multiple partners, cities, universities, and NGOs. Aalborg University was one. And I was leading our work on that project, and I'll show you a bit from it today. This diagram shows the cross-sectoral and multi-scalar approach that we from Aalborg University tried to bring into that project to work with the city, with urban design, and with the social science in one. So in Art Forum, what we did was to provide research support on the implications of the application of autonomous mobilities in urban and suburban contexts. We did a case study of a pilot project, a trial in Denmark in the district of Aalborg East that I'll say a bit about. And then we also tried to go to a more general perspective and did a study of social science literature to look at the potential implications of autonomous vehicles on the contemporary city. And this is an image from the district of Aalborg East in Denmark, where in 2020 till 21, there was a small autonomous shuttle driving on this pathway. You can see it in the background here, this cute little thing. What you just saw was actually a transformation of this place. I'll just go back so you can see a bit, because I want to make a point about that. This trial with autonomous shuttle buses was part of a larger suburban transformation process in this district. It is a district that was planned, designed, and built in the mid of the 20th century according to functionalist logics, traffic segregation, and functional zoning. We know these principles from many places around the world, built according to modernist Siam thinking, and that has resulted in what I've called rational and utilitarian logics being frozen in asphalt and concrete. So, like, very strong urban principles of how to organize a city that we see in many places around the world. So the shuttles were part of that context. It was called the Smart Bus Project, and it was a proposal regarding how to work with this innovative mobility technology by introducing it as part of an urban strategic vision to transform this district into what they called the suburb of the future. So similar to, smart city visions around the world. So it was not a test of the technology itself or of its traffic functionality, but rather interweaved with these other urban agendas. The test was set up to investigate the technology as a means of pursuing practical and social purposes in this concrete urban context, and as part of the ongoing social and urban transformation of the existing area. And these are some images from our qualitative research done on this trial. We followed the project for a period of 4 years, from before the shuttles were running, when the city was planning it and reconstructing the physical spaces to make space for this bus. And we followed it during the trial and also after it ended. And our research on the trial focused on what we call the meeting between people, city, and technology. We combined various methods, including site analysis and mapping, observations, focus group interviews, ethnographic interviews, and go-alongs, and also a collaborative exhibition with the community. And as such, what we did or tried to do was to begin to develop a community and place-based approach to understanding what's going on when a new technology like this one and a new infrastructure like this one is embedded in a real-life context with real people, with everyday life, pedestrians and cyclists, with urban space and diverse mobility patterns and needs that it must meet. And also in understanding the technology and the infrastructure in a transformation process that we illustrated on this timeline that includes social as well as spatial interventions, seeking to handle some of the socioeconomic issues that actually developed in this satellite town not long after it was built. So around the world, driverless vehicles are being investigated in various ways, and studies have revealed that there are a lot of important unresolved questions about where, how, and with what benefits the technology can be used. In our study, which was a deep case study, we concluded on the quite rich and detailed context-specific insights with the 8 lessons that I just listed there. And I'll just say a few words about them. Because in our interactions with people in the district, in and around the bus, actually technology was often not in the foreground at all. Rather, people were interested in what kind of opportunities for meeting other people or for benefiting their daily life this would give them. And it doesn't come as a surprise in a way, but still a lot of technological studies put technology in the center and not people and everyday life in the center, or the city in the center. So I want to stress that the embedding of the trial in the particular social and spatial geography of this district made it possible to examine these autonomous shuttles and their use as they unfolded in daily life with real humans. And this happened to happen with many encounters and quite a few quirks and ticks in the meeting between technology and city and people. I like to think about this as tales of entanglement, maybe, between different people, spaces, technology, and also the strategic aims and visions from the city. And as you can see, I mean, just from this snapshot on the pathway, we have the autonomous bus there and somebody on a horseback, and various people kind of interacting with this thing, this technology in their daily life. So technology and the infrastructure did by no means work in a vacuum, we could say in this case. It was contextualized socially as well as spatially. People and the physical space may, in technological images of the future, sometimes seem as barriers to a smooth and frictionless smart future that would rather have people to be like particles to be shuffled around in rational systems. But what we saw in this study was the stuff that actually makes a community: social life, culture, place, and identity. And we saw in particular people forming new connections around the shuttles, in a way mediated by the technology and by the shuttles. And we saw the space being transformed and experienced otherwise through it. So indeed, we found that the interactions that took place in and around the studies, in and around the shuttle, may spark a curiosity about how driverless mobility can be brought into play as an element in socially sustainable mobility development and also in urban development. Perhaps a community approach could be further developed, a collaborative approach integrating mobility, local community development, social work, and maybe the quality of public spaces. And I'll leave that particular case there and move on to a broader perspective on autonomous vehicles, but it's one that carries on with the focus on the intertwining of automation, city, and people. This is the other part of the work that we did in the Art Forum project. It's the social science literature study of the potential implications of autonomous vehicles on our cities and the uncertainty or the unsettledness of those prospects, where not only the technological development continues to be dynamic and with twists and turns and halts, as Richard just suggested, but not least, how various place-specific and social and cultural factors may influence heavily the potential realization of any future scenario with the autonomous vehicles. Yeah. So AVs in the future city, what could that be about? Is it a future with smart vehicles that can drive themselves? In the current situations, it seems that we cannot just look to the past and simply project that into the future. And this question about autonomous vehicles in the future city is therefore a rather open one, and it's answered in various ways out there in the literature. There are different types of future autonomous vehicle imaginations out there, and we may roughly summarize these in some scenarios. On the one end of the spectrum, on the top here, we could have a utopian scenario where AVs, autonomous vehicles, are assumed to be electric, and it's assumed that people share them as part of a new mobility service system. And in this utopian scenario, this would lead to a better urban future, to cities with fewer cars, more green space, more walking, more biking. But on the other hand, there's also a dystopian scenario that we can find in the literature. Here, AVs are not shared. They are not necessarily electric, but gasoline powered and privately owned. This leads to cities where empty zombie cars roam the streets, the extensive road networks. Car dependency, as we've known it through the 20th century, continues. There's less space and possibility for active mobility, cycling and walking, and the cities continue to sprawl. So the question is, will there be a future with AVs? That's the first question. And if so, what will that future be like? Will AVs help us solve key problems of the contemporary city? Will they be connected, electric, and shared? And is this technology really as straightforward and risk-free as some of the bright utopian images tend to suggest. We could take a look at the car-based city of today to the right in this drawing that we produced for the project. AVs may be on their way. They may promise to help solve congestion and safety issues. They may promise to be smart, to bring a bright future. But similarly, we dare to say, as illustrated on your left, scholars and professionals and the first bits of the car industry throughout the 1800s would see the bright advantages of the very first stages of small horseless carriages. Yeah, such a carriage would have no need for the smelly and demanding and noisy horses of the past. They were self-moving, they were automobile. However, as we know, the replacement of horsepower with gasoline has received much criticism, not least of planners and politicians' willingness to allow the car-centric city to grow and thrive in spite of the serious problems it caused alongside the advantages of swift private mobility. Because a rough characteristic of the car-based city includes both that the car allows us swiftness and comfort, privacy and flexibility in going, in principle at least, anywhere at any time. But the car's dominance in our cities and in our mobility systems also include unsustainable practices, mobility injustice, serious health issues, staggering numbers of fatalities, space inequality, and urban sprawl. So, how do we at this point in time learn from the development of the car-based city? How do we avoid ending up in a future that reproduces the bads of the automobile, or maybe even produces more troubling situations, as some scholars would warn us? And I have one here, which is mobility scholar Mimi Scheller. She used to be a professor at Lancaster University. Now she's based in the US. And she brings such a warning about the future of mobility and the transition away from carbon dependence and the polluting technologies of the past. She writes that even if or when this green transition finally does take place, we may end up in a problematic situation. We may find ourselves depending on other technologies that are perhaps green, but culturally and socially problematic in ways that are even more troubling than the technologies of the past. So this warning could spur us to seek to understand more about what AVs might eventually mean to our cities, to seek to contribute critical and constructive reflection, to understand more about what is actually facing us here. In other words, maybe to consider both the potential benefits, but also the potential challenges of a future with autonomous vehicles. I want to say a bit about the automobility system, and I want to use sociologist John Urry, who was also a professor at Lancaster University, and he's written a lot about the automobility system, conceptualizing it as a socially and economically locked-in system in which our economies and societies and everyday life are locked into the car. Billions of actors and processes, he shows in his work, related to technological developments, to lifestyles, markets, industries, land use, are so closely connected to automobility in a socio-technical system that it is very difficult to break away from. And because of these many interlinked elements and interests, Urry has called this system a Frankenstein-created monster that forces people to juggle fragments of time so as to deal with the temporal and spatial constraints that it itself generates. Yeah. So wrapping up on our work on autonomous mobilities, my attempt here is to invite all of us to connect autonomous vehicles with the critical reflection. And I want to highlight 3 areas of reflection here. The first one is autonomous vehicles in system transitions. We've seen the assumptions behind the most bright imaginings of the future with AVs, that they are shared, electric, and connected. And these assumptions are in more or less explicit terms behind many scenarios that foresee the benefits of autonomous vehicles, also from, or in particular from the industry. But each of these innovations requires systemic transition in itself. For shared mobility, for example, we see that in Denmark, I assume that we see it here as well. We've seen that it's very complex to break away from private car ownership at a large scale. The cultural, emotional, practical, and infrastructural attachment that most of us experience and the dependency that we have on our private car use, is one of the core lock-ins of the automobility system. So a transition to sharing may not be straightforward at all. So what happens to the future of mobility if AVs are not that, if they are not electric, shared, and connected? The second area of reflection is about autonomous vehicles as a potential for solving problems in the city. Will AVs help us solve problems of the car-based city, such as the social inequalities embedded in the system, the space inequality, sprawl, the excessive land use for roads and parking, and the serious safety issues of the current situation? We cannot approach autonomous vehicles in a vacuum or as a technical question alone, separated from cultures, spaces, social practices, markets, and policies. Technological and social implications co-develop in intricate ways, and potential benefits of AVs might often be based on various assumptions that we cannot predict, and thus they should not be considered a straightforward matter, of course, the literature argues. If AVs enter the city on the current conditions of the car system without changing the underlying problematic forces of automobility, may these and other problems then be maintained or even worsened? And third and last area of reflection, and perhaps a more positive note to end on, the approaches we may take to face the uncertainty of a future with autonomous vehicles. What do we want autonomous vehicles to be? Scholar Jack Stilgoe asserts that autonomous vehicles are not settled yet. Perhaps we can shape autonomous vehicles to the futures we want, as he suggests here. How can we avoid getting drawn into planning for the technology rather than for the inclusive, sustainable kinds of societal outcomes that we want to see? How do we place socially and ecologically just mobilities at the center of transport futures rather than technologies? Can we, in that process, regard that yesterday's solutions are not sufficient, that the assumption of stability no longer holds, and perhaps find ways to move from a predict and provide paradigm that has been dominant in our approach to planning for the future of traffic throughout the 20th century? And we've been forecasting traffic growth and provided the road space, the asphalt for that growth throughout the 20th century. And can we move towards what Philip Christ, who works with innovation and foresight at the International Transport Forum, what he suggests, that we find new ways of shaping mobility, one that does not predict and provide, but one that decides on just and sustainable mobility and provides for that. So on that note, I want to zoom out from the issue of automation in mobility to the broader picture of sustainable mobility transitions, and show you a few statements on the alternative cultures and habits and thinking of mobility futures that are being debated currently. You may also, of course, be involved in some yourself, but what I highlighted here is the efforts to make shared mobility rocks, making sharing rather than owning a new credo in mobility. I also showed an example of the critical stance to techno-fixing the future and a call for boring, well-known solutions, such as public transport and cycling, and car freedom, we could maybe say, as the opposite to car dependency. And I have a picture there that you might also know, an image of what the car-based city may actually feel like for a pedestrian. So, very last slide, and in conclusion, I briefly want to return to the point. What I wanted to try with this presentation was to highlight our work on theoretical and empirical insights on the social and spatial agency and implications of infrastructure and technologies when it manifests in local realities in cities and when implicated in the complexities of urban transformation and transition processes of making futures. And since I work with design, I have a keen interest in also trying to contribute some reflections for the design field here. And I think as designers, we could work constructively and critically with how a bridge that we design or a mobility plan that we're involved with generates both spatial and social effects. In particular, when working with mobilities, there seems to be still a need to push our work beyond a technical managerial rationale. And this has a deep future and intervention-oriented urgency, I find, asking, for example, will deep social issues remain with a transition to greener ecological futures, for example, with green infrastructure designs? Will they even worsen? Will new problematic side effects be created? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dita. That was really brilliant. And I think that there are a couple of things, but before, I'm sure there will be questions. Do you want to pop the light on? Just
Yes,
behind you?
of course.
I'm sure there will be questions, but what's kind of struck me over the years working in a couple of, it'll come in the morning, a couple of schools of architecture and built environment is that this kind of research sometimes struggles to find a place in the mainstream of like education of architects or education of planners or education of technologists. And I don't think there's anything in this presentation that would actually be out of place in certainly any of the courses within the department that I work in. I would also say that the work, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, because I've said it before in other forums, I think the work that Dita and her team did in Aalborg East was one of the most in-depth, kind of qualitative, long-term studies that I've seen. And it was so far away from, at the beginning of Art Forum and another project I was involved with, looking at KPIs for key performance indicators for autonomous vehicles. They were all about how many cars can we sell, how many vehicles can we sell, how many do we have on the road, how many roads have we managed to isolate, and so on. And I thought what was amazing was that you didn't reject that, but you went into it in a kind of open way, and we found out that actually most of these indicators should be social or socioeconomic rather than technological. So I thought that was enough about what I think, though. So, does anybody have any questions, or any points they would like to make, or any observations at all?
I have one question and one observation, if I could. One is, you said culturally, there was a word there, culturally problematic.
Yeah.
If you could give a couple of examples, or maybe you did and I did not.
Yeah. I think I referred to Mimi Scheller's work there. Sorry, I'll just find the quote. I think she's the one using it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. We're still speculating here, right? If when we let's say employ new strategies, new technologies to bring about the hope for green transition, what are
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to have that. It was really interesting.
Thank you. What could be the futures arising from that, and are there social and cultural problems connected to those futures?
Yes.
It could be that we would be locked into patterns of inequality that are even stronger than today. What if, for example, if autonomous vehicles are still privately owned and you can buy access to road space? You can program your car with the money you have to drive faster and take up the space.
You could choose the routes I will be following.
Yeah, whereas the poorer people couldn't.
Okay.
Maybe that would, enlarge the inequalities that we already see embedded in the automobility system. I think that could be one example.
Very good example.
Yeah.
Very good example of this. Okay. And one little observation was you have said safer than humans.
Yeah.
I think you mean safer than human-driven cars. Is that
Probably, yeah.
There's the slide after this though.
Okay.
It says safer
Thank
than
you.
humans. It is a kind of safer than humans. I think what you mean there is safer than humans.
Human drivers.
driving the cars. That's what you mean. Because
Yeah.
safer than humans gives a very different.
Yes.
Yeah. But just
Good
a thought,
point. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does any of this? Yeah, sure.
First of all, thanks very much for the informative presentation. And by the way, I really like the way that the slides are produced.
Oh, thank you.
So my question really is, are there any changes in terms of the attitudes of the people in the project that you've worked on? So for example, I assume when we started to have the autonomous vehicles in that area, it may involve some reconstruction of the road.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Or people resisting, and then after it has been in place for a while, do people's attitudes change?
I think the picture is really varied in terms of the attitudes of people. So we spoke to, I think, a total of 150 people during the course of the project out there. And in the beginning of the project, before the shuttles were running and while they were doing the construction work on the pathway, we did, I think, 3 focus group interviews to understand more about the attitude of people and the expectations towards this project. And at that point, people were, I think, seeing a lot of challenges, perhaps even being a bit afraid of what this technology would bring to their pathway. And I think the reason is really context specific, because what you see here, you see kind of a very varied use of this pathway. It's a soft mobility route through this district where children would play and walk to school alone and learn how to cycle. Stuff like that would go on there. And the adults living in the area and working in the area, they would kind of see for themselves, this huge bus coming in and also maybe not trusting the technology beforehand. How it turned out was then that this bus, and I didn't tell you, but it ran so slowly. It was, I think, the average speed was 8.4 kilometers an hour. So, I mean, you could cycle past it like that, right? Even walk if you were really fast, because it had to stop all the time also. So it was so slow, and it had such a defensive protocol of driving. So if I did this in front of it would stop immediately. Right. So, and also if a leaf fell from a tree, or if a pigeon flew in front. So lots of stuff like that was going on. And over time, people learned that, of course, and children, especially young teenagers, I have to say, they also played along with it. So it was kind of fun to, tease the bus by walking in front of it, and then it would stop immediately. And actually, I think that the biggest sort of problems that got out of that was for the people inside the bus, because the abrupt braking was really uncomfortable, and actually a few people got injured for real because it stopped so quickly, right? So those were also some of the learnings, and we've published a transport paper on some of that stuff that I didn't highlight today, but it says here low speed and abrupt hard braking was really part of it. I think another important thing maybe to highlight in relation to your question is what we call the operators. Maybe a better English term would be the stewards, because the bus was autonomous on SAE level 3, which means that there has to be a steward or a driver in there all the time, like the video we saw from Richard from Bremen. There has to be someone in there to be able to take over control at any time. So there was a woman or a man in there at any time, and it turned out that those operators or stewards, they got a really sort of particular and I think even beautiful role of, community care. Yeah. And I think actually maybe the biggest benefit for the community and the social life was that bus turned out to be an intimate social space where you could always find somebody to talk to, especially the children. There's a lot of disadvantaged children in this area. And they would go in there, at night and get warm and talk to a grown-up that they would trust, and all sorts of stuff like that happened, which in a way is paradoxical because it's supposed to be driverless. But the biggest community value was the driver, the human. Yeah.
In relation to that, though, but I remember in the early part of this and the PAVE project, there was quite a lot of discussion from transport operators saying that one of the benefits that they saw of the vehicles was that they wouldn't need to pay drivers anymore.
Yeah.
So there seemed to be this idea that...
But that was also, sorry. Yeah.
And I kind of thought, well, the vehicles cost quite a lot, so they're going to have to run for quite a time before you make back the cost. But some of my colleagues in my previous university whose expertise was in like network modelling and so on, they went down to the Scottish Parliament and made this argument and said, this is brilliant because we can sack all, but they didn't say, but this is brilliant, we can sack all bus drivers. But it's what they said, and the members of the Scottish Parliament understandably reacted really badly to that because they were kind of saying, what you're telling us that you want to spend millions of pounds on technology so that we can put people who don't earn that much money out of work,
Yeah.
So I thought, but early in the project, we were kind of saying, maybe the driver could do something else. And I remember the transport operators were like, yeah, okay, but you could automate disabled people getting on off the bus. And so I thought that was quite powerful, actually, that people liked there was still a human on the bus.
I have to say, I think it's also paradoxical because one of the reasons why the city of Aalborg wanted to test out a driverless bus here is because of the economic feasibility that they see in the future of not having a driver on a route like this. And in Denmark right now, it's being debated a lot because we have lots of economic pressure on the public transport system that once we get the driverless vehicles, then everything will be solved because we don't have to pay the salary, right? And I think because maybe public transport is not just about shuffling people from A to B, maybe it's also about care. Maybe it's about meeting other people. Maybe spaces like that, the intimate space in that small bus where you actually face each other like we would do around the table here. Maybe that space, if there's no authority to kind of handle conflicts and problems in that space, then what's it about then? Can we do that? I just think a lot of question arises, and we can only speculate because we didn't get to study that here. We had the steward there at all times, so we haven't seen it without in a Danish context.
Thank you, though, Ditte. That was fantastic.
Thank you for inviting me, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you for your good questions.